Good day to our dear listeners and viewers. Welcome once again to our Salida Teleradio, right here at La Filipina National High School. Today, we will learn another interesting topic, the Renaissance period, particularly linear perspective, in Mapinine Arts, Module 1 of Quarter 2. Together with your teacher broadcaster, Teacher Rolando PAMA. I am your teacher host, Teacher Angelica Cajes. Now, I will turn you over to our very own Teacher Rolando.
Thank you so much, Miss Millennial, Ma'am Angelica Milian Cajes. Good day, listeners and viewers. Welcome to Salida Teleradio. Despite of the pandemic that we have, we still be able to learn our lesson by discussing it through FM radio station 98.3 Gold FM. Kuyawa, no? And of course, we are live in our very own Salida TV, the official Facebook Salida TV of the La Filipina National High School. Today, I am your teacher broadcaster, Teacher Rolando Pantilio Pama, aka Jimet Lee. This afternoon, we'll be learning in the world of arts. This is for grade 9 students who are studying MAPI subject, particularly in Arts Quarter 2 of Module 1, which is Renaissance Art, its distinct characteristics. Our objectives for today's lesson are: Number 1. Define and discuss Renaissance historical background and its development. Number 2. Discuss one of the distinct characteristics of Renaissance art and its types. Number 3. Create an artwork guided by the technique and style of the Renaissance perspective. But before we begin with our lesson or discussion, let's have first the pre-assessment. This is to test your knowledge prior to the topic that I will be discussing. So students, please have now your pen and paper for you to write your answer on each question. You are only given 5 seconds to answer of each question, and after 5 seconds, I will reveal the correct answer. Okay? Just write down the letter of the correct answer of the given question. Shall we start now? Question number 1. What does the word Renaissance mean? A. Awaken. B. Culture. C. Rebirth. D. Talent. Again, what does the word Renaissance mean? A. Awaken. B. Culture. C. Rebirth. D. Talent. Your time starts now. The correct answer is letter C. Rebirth. Question number 2. What form of art developed by the Renaissance that was characterized by accurate anatomy? A. Painting. B. Sculpture. C. Architecture. D. Landscape. Again, what form of arts developed by the Renaissance that was characterized by accurate anatomy? A. Painting. B. Sculpture. C. Architecture. D. Landscape. Your time starts now. The correct answer is letter B, sculpture. Next, question number 3. Around what year did Renaissance begin? A. 13th to 17th century. B. 14th to 16th century. C. 15th to 16th century. D. 15th to 17th century. Again, around what year did Renaissance begin? A. 13th to 17th century. B. 14th to 16th century. C. 15th to 16th century. D. 15th to 17th century. Your time starts now. The correct answer is letter B, 14th to 16th century. Question number 4. What are technique creating an illusions of 3 or 2-dimensional surface? A. Perspective. B. Dimensional. C. 2-point perspective. D. 1-point perspective. Again, what are technique creating an illusions of 3 or 2-dimensional surface? A. Perspective. B. Dimensional. C. 2-point perspective, D. 1-point perspective. Your time starts now. The correct answer is letter C, 2-point perspective. Last question. What type of perspective which contain only one vanishing point on the horizon line? A. Perspective. B. Two-dimensional. C. Linear perspective. D. 1-point perspective. Again, what type of perspective which contain only one vanishing point on the horizon line? A. Perspective. B. Two-dimensional. C. Linear perspective. And D. 1-point perspective. Your time starts now. The correct answer is letter D. 1-point perspective. So, students, how's your score? So, I'm hoping that you get all items correctly. Now, for you to understand further about our topic, I have some questions for you to assess. So, let's have number 1. Are you familiar with the flyover construction here in Tagum City? Yes, tanan gyud ta, kabalo gyud ta ana nga nay flyover nga gitukod sa Tagum City. Imposible gyud kita kita unsa atong mga mata karton nga dita kita kadako ana halos sa mabanggaan nato ng mga building diha, I mean pag-construct ana diha, di ba? No? Right? Correct. So that is one of the construction here in Tagum City, ang flyover from NCCC going to tawag dito, City Mall. Ayan. What about New City Hall? Nakabisita na ba ta dito? Nakalaag na ba na dito? Ang uban ano kana gyud date. O ako juk adto anang wala ko ga adtong City Hall class kaya magdadala ko kauban kay di ko ganahan. So probably pag mo adto og City Hall no kay kanang kuan nang gyud kanang solo flight usay daghan mi kay di ko ganahan machismis ko murag lain. Okay? Okay. Now talking of these questions, what are your thoughts about these things that I mentioned? Okay? So nakuha niyo anong ibig sabihin noon? Yung mga binigay ko na mga questions. Now, all of these questions are related to our topic, which is the Renaissance art. And that Renaissance art has what we call linear perspective. Okay, talking of Renaissance, what is Renaissance? Now, Renaissance from the French word which means rebirth. It is a rebirth or revival of learning from antiquity. It is a rediscovery of learning from ancient Greek and Roman arts and culture. And this is what we call development. Now, talking of arts of Greek and Roman. Now, we have this form of arts of the Greeks and Romans. We have the painting, the sculpture, and architecture. And with regards to the culture, it talks about the culture of the Greeks and Romans. We have the religion. We have the politics, science, and of course, the society. When we say society, yung mga tao ng Greek and Romans. Okay, and this is how Renaissance developed, no? So, ni-revive, binago nila yung mga work of arts developed by the Greeks and Romans. And this is what we call changes, development and changes, and of course, there is what we call evolution. Okay, now how Renaissance developed and what are the changes? Renaissance began in Italy in the late 14th to 16th century. It is a period of economic progress. Capitalism was born, and the main goal is to have a profit. This is an era of great artistic and intellectual achievements. So Renaissance is humanist. Now talking of economic progress, society produced higher value. When we say higher value, more or better, no? Goods and services with the use of the same or equivalent resources. So let me have an example for this one, no? Talking of the economic progress or mga higher value that we have. Now, for example, kung mga trabaho, di ba? Pag mga trabaho nagita sa mga minimum wage, no? So kung render kag 8 hours, it should be ang 8 hours nimo eksakto po na sa ibayad. Kung mo render po ka og kanang ginatawag natong overtime, na po siya bayad. So that is why ang period nito ay pantay-pantay. So mano yung nakaingon nga naa sa ekonomiya, progreso ang ekonomiya kasi ang tao dito sa panahon ng Renaissance ay pantay-pantay ang treatment. Okay, nakuha. Now, another thing is capitalism. Now, when we say capitalism, anong ibig sabihin ng capitalism? Ito ay private or individual or companies not related to the government, owned businesses. So, individually, ang mga tao, no, may mga tinatawag silang mga businesses, no? Private ka man or nasa kumpanya, ilahan ng kaugalingon nga business. So, naas tayo freedom nga mag-put up ng mga businesses, no? Dili related sa government. Unlike before the Renaissance, we have this medieval period na para silang ginatukok sila ba, no? Na bawal, na dahag bawal. But on the Renaissance, na ay freedom. Okay? Now, the main goal of Renaissance is to have profit. No? Meaning, dapat sila na income. Ang mga tao magkaroon ng income. Dili pwede dire ang patay-patay, dili pwede dire ang luya-luya ka ng mga tinamad, mga tuwag na tag, mga nga, tukod ta perminti. Sumulihok kita tao, bingon ang Ginoo, lihok tao aron tabangan ta. O di ba? So kailangan magkaroon tayo ng income. We have a lot of mga pamaahagi kung paano magkaroon ng income. We have mga nasa social media. Pwede ta mabuhat og candy, pwede hata buhat og baruya, ipamaligya nato. So that is the main goal of the Renaissance, to have income, no? So another thing, ang Renaissance class is an era of great artistic and intellectual achievements. So as I've said earlier, Renaissance is humanist, makatao, no? So kung makatao, makabansa at makakalikasan. Panatang, no, joke. Not that, joke lang siya. When I say humanist, makatao siya. Okay? Makatao. So para sa tao, para sa lahat, para sa tanan ang gusto mitabo sa Renaissance. So ang mga tao dito class, no, people were given chance to prove their skills, capabilities, and how to value the existence of human being. So pantay-pantay ang treatment nila, no? So kung nakay skill sa painting, nakay skill sa pag-sculpture or sculpture, paggawa ng skulptura, no? So ginatagaan nila chance na mag-grow ang isa ka tao, dili nila gina-limit ang iyahang skill. So ginatagaan nila time or ginapaprove nila nga makaya nila. That is why ang period ng Renaissance is a progressive era. Okay? Now this is how people in Renaissance, nga nung nagkaroon sila ng magandang mga pamumuhay, no, ang Renaissance. Now, Renaissance emphasis on reasoning and free inquiry or tinatawag din logical thinking, no? May mga freedom ang mga tao to reason out, no, to voice out kung say gusto nila mahitabo, dili sila ginatukok, no? So naay freedom, as I've said earlier. Now this is how Renaissance arts and cultures develop, no? And tinatawag na nag-evolve. So kung may development and evolvement, there is what we call also changes. Okay? Now talking of changes, a lot of changes happened during Renaissance period, particularly in arts. Now, arts during Renaissance period have distinct characteristics, which applies symmetry and balance. So, when it says symmetry and balance, there is what we call measurements, no, exact measurements, pantay. Okay? Now, and one of the characteristic is the linear perspective. Now, talking of linear perspective, a linear perspective is a system of creating an illusion of depth flat surface in all parallel lines in picture, painting, or drawing. Okay? Now, ganito yan siya mga estudyante, no? Mga listeners. Kita picture-picture, kung picture, bisan asa lugar, wata kabalo na ada na siya linear perspective. Walang kita kabalo, no? And that linear perspective started na siya sa Renaissance period. Diha siya na-develop. Momento nang karon ang mga painting, mga sculpture, and architecture has what we call linear perspective, no? May mga tinatawag na illusions of depth sa mga surfaces, no? We have this mga parallel lines, no, na tinatawag sa painting, sa sculpture, or drawing. Sometimes mag-draw ka ng kalsada, no, kaya di gyud na pantay ang length, ang surface niya, ang area, right? Pag siya, padako to pagamay atong pag-drawing sa kalsada, that is linear perspective. But itang sila tag-drawing pero wala ta kabalo nga, that is linear perspective. Okay? Now talking of linear perspective, we have these two types of linear perspective. One is 1-point perspective, and the other one is the 2-point perspective. So ano-ano ito mga 1-point and 2-point perspective? Let's talk about 1-point perspective. A 1-point perspective, a drawing has 1-point perspective when it contains one vanishing point on the horizon line. It is typically used an image of roads or buildings so that the front is directly facing the viewer. Now, when we say 1 point, one vanishing point class, no? Ito yung, for example, ito yung kalsada going to patutag Davao City. Manukad ta sa kuan, manukad ta sa barracks. Padong ta sa Davao City. Di ba pag magkuha kag picture naka sa sentro sa kalsada, no? Straight imong picture going to Davao City, makita dito ang 1-point perspective kasi ang space from bigger to smaller space, and that end ang tumoy ana is what we call the vanishing point. 1-point perspective siya. Nakuha. Another example is ang kalsada going to New City Hall. Okay? We have this kalsada na dalawang kalsada diyan sa New City Hall, pasok ng City Hall, di ba? Pasulod tag City Hall. O, manukad ta diri sa kanto. Unsa nga kanto? Apokon. Kalsada sa Apokon, padong ta sa sulod sa City Hall. Di ba? Pag manukad ka din ha, makita nato ang tumoy is pagamay siya. That is an example of 1-point perspective. Kuha? Okay. Another is ang 2-point perspective. Ano itong 2-point perspective? A method using lines to create an illusion of space on a 2-dimensional surface, no? 2 vanishing points placed on the horizon line. Okay. The best example for this one class is yung mga kalsada, no? Yung right angle na kalsada. For example, kalsada from start sa Jollibee. Muna itong starting point Jollibee. Kalsada going to Davao City and kalsada going to Mako. Angle siya, diba? Right angle. So, if you're going to stand, nakada sa sentro sa crossing, magkuha ka ng picture, duha, makita ang 1 point sa patug Davao City and another point going to Mako, and that is 2-point perspective. So yun ang ginagamit ng mga engineers, no? They were using mga perspective para makita. And I remember class when I was in college, no, I took up engineering course, no? 2 years ko sa engineering. Naglisod ko class. Kay lisod pa po kayo, no? Kung sige lang tawag kuan, labi nagkuan ka, labi naog ka ng scholar, working student ka, no? So it's really hard for me to adjust unsaon ako pag pagpadayon sa pag-eskwela as engineering student kasi nagalakaw ako, no? So pagbalik wala ko kabalong. No, may mga activity kami na more on mga perspective drawing. So dito, first ko mo is ang perspective ng activity, no? Basic siya. So kailangan sa drawing na mo exact ang measurements, walay erasures, tama. Kung eskwela kag engineering ay no makarelate ang mga student ka engineering ani, no? Student nga nag-eskwela og engineering. So makarelate sila. So ang ginabuhat is kailangan limpyo ang imong output sa activity. So kailangan makita ang top view, the front view, and the side view. So, mo din siya sa una, nakalimutan ko nga, mo din siya mga perspective, no? So, lahat yan siya, gina-apply ang tinatawag na mga perspective. It could be in painting, sculpture, and architecture. Okay? So, what we have now are the development and evolutions during Renaissance period. Lahat-lahat nun siya ay mga pagbabago galing sa Renaissance period. Naga-evolve, no? Every generation, naga-evolve ang mga forms of art. Not only arts, but also kultura ang culture. Now, constructions of roads and buildings are the manifestations of the Renaissance art, which has linear perspective characteristics. Okay? Now, as you have seen nowadays class, no, makita nato despite of the pandemic, the Build program of our very own President Rodrigo Roa Duterte has continued, di ba? Makita nato bisan asa lugar, baskin karon ganito sa Tagum City ang ato ang flyover nagapadayon maskin naata sa crisis, right? So yun siya ang mga example na applies with symmetry and balance mga infrastructure na ginawa ng gobyerno. That is an example of the linear perspective. Okay? So, to sum up with the topic, Renaissance have the greatest influence and contributions to the whole world in the field of arts and culture. So lahat meron tayo ngayon, no, in forms of arts and kultura ay galing yan sa Renaissance, developed ng Renaissance, no? So they apply this mga forms of arts and culture galing sa Renaissance and apply nato until now. Mabito na makabantay tarong nga different form of arts that we have. Kanadi siya na din mga kanta na din mga teknika na gikan sa Renaissance period, no? So yon siya ang tinatawag na mga the evolution and history of the Renaissance period. Okay, class, I know you have learned so much from the topic that was being discussed. Okay, now you are now in your post-test. Are you ready with your post-test? Please have now your pen and paper for you to write your answer on each question. Again, the same pattern. You are only given 5 seconds to answer each question and 5 seconds to reveal the... After 5 seconds, I will reveal the correct answer. So just write the letter only of the correct answer of the given question. So shall we start now? Okay. Number 1. What does the word Renaissance mean? A. Awaken. B. Culture. C. Rebirth. D. Talent. Again, what does the word Renaissance mean? A. Awaken. B. Culture. C. Rebirth. D. Talent. Your time starts now. The correct answer is letter C. Rebirth. Question number 2. What form of arts developed by the Renaissance that was characterized by accurate anatomy? A. Painting. B. Sculpture. C. Architecture. D. Landscape. Again, what form of arts developed by the Renaissance that was characterized by accurate anatomy? A. Painting. B. Sculpture. C. Architecture. D. Landscape. Your time starts now. Okay, the correct answer is letter B, sculpture. Number 3 question. Around what year did Renaissance begin? A. 13th to 17th century. B. 14th to 16th century. C. 15th to 16th century. D. 15th to 17th century. Again, around what year did Renaissance begin? A. 13th to 17th century. B. 14th to 16th century. C. 15th to 16th century. D. 15th to 17th century. Your time starts now. The correct answer is letter B, 14th to 16th century. Question number 4. What are techniques creating an illusions of 3 or 2-dimensional surface? A. Perspective. B. 2-dimensional. C. 2-point perspective. D. 1-point perspective. Again, what are techniques creating an illusions of 3 or 2-dimensional surface? A. Perspective. B. 2-dimensional. C. 2-point perspective. D. 1-point perspective. Your time starts now. The correct answer is letter C, 2-point perspective. Okay, for your last number 5. What type of perspective which contain only one vanishing point on the horizon line? A. Perspective. B. 2-dimensional. C. Linear perspective. D. 1-point perspective. Again, what type of perspective which contain only one vanishing point on the horizon line? A. Perspective. B. 2-dimensional. C. Linear perspective. D. 1-point perspective. Your time starts now. The correct answer is letter D, 1-point perspective. How's your score, students? I'm sure nakakuha ang uban ng perfect score. Congratulations! Pero katong wala kakuha og dili perfect, managing nga dawat-dawat. So, see you next teleradio. So, para sa inyong assignment, you have to make or create, draw, or take a picture using cell phone or any materials found inside or outside your house that shows types of linear perspective. So, kailangan sa pag-create ninyo, sa paggawa ng inyong mga activity, bawal magpalayo sa inyong balay, dili magkiat-kiat. So, only ang makita lang sa inyong dapit sa kalsada, sulod sa inyong balay or outside lang ang buhato na activity. So, after making an activity, post it on your Facebook wall or send it to my messenger, Jimet Lee. Okay? That's all for today. Dahang salamat sa iyong papaminaw sa atong leksyon karong hapuna. Hantod sa sunod natong panagkita o panag-uban, kailangan maminaw gyud mo kana pa ko'y mga pasabog sa sunod nga mga teleradyo. So, amping ta kanunay and God bless.
Wow! What an amazing and fun discussion from Teacher Rolando, aka Sir Jimet Lee. Thank you, sir, and thank you also to our dear viewers and listeners for tuning in. I hope that you really learned a lot from our discussion, because I also really learned a lot from Sir Rolando's topic. See you again in the next session of our Teleradio. Have a good day!